Hello everyone, welcome to a second thoughts overview of Karl Franz of Reichland. I went through the initial turns and observed the victory conditions, starting location, diplomacy, mechanics, buildings, units, etc. And I took my own conclusions. In the later parts of the video, I will show you what army compositions I would do and why. This is how I typically approach my campaigns, what I check while making my plans of conquest. It should not be considered a fully in-depth guide, but will have elements of it certainly. Without further ado, let's check out Emperor Karl Franz of Reichland. For our short victory condition, we have to take out the Empire Secessionists, the Barrow Legion to the east, and Sylvania to the west. In addition, we need at least to occupy, loot, raise or sack 30 different settlements. Should we achieve this, we'll be rewarded with hero capacity +3 for all heroes, a good buff to ensure we can have heroes in our armies or for scouting purposes, without having to construct too many buildings for it early on. As we progress our campaign, the long campaign victory must include all the short victory conditions, to occupy, loot, raise or sack 70 different settlements, and to control all of the Empire, either directly or via allies. This area, approximately. Should we continue, and wish to continue, we'll be rewarded with +10 hero recruit rank in all provinces, certainly a nice buff, to ensure our heroes are better as we recruit new ones for the next objectives. Now, as Karl Franz, we are Heir of Sigma, so we enjoy some buffs such as diplomatic relations with Empire, more prestige gained from battles, +2 to Lord recruit rank, and more campaign movement range, +10% to all armies. This is helpful in the early game as well as throughout the whole campaign. As for climate, it suffers penalties in many terrain types, making it a poor faction to dominate the whole map. You should stick to the Empire lands for as long as possible before going north, or you can risk having too many penalties. You can see here the penalties that typically will happen, both in unpleasant. It's manageable in unpleasant, but uninhabitable is quite unrewarding. So be mindful of that while you plan your conquests. Our initial province has 4 settlements, which will allow more options of which buildings to construct, and most certainly a good hybrid economy and military province. It is easy to conquer, very easy to hold on to, with forts nearby to protect from any incursions. Enemies will typically arrive from the north or the west, such as from Vlad, or from Feastus and the Beastmen, but we be wary of anyone risking going through these forts, as that may happen as well. Typical expansions will either get us east into Bretonnia lands, north and west into the lands of the Empire. South is good to stop near these forts, or else we can risk overexpansion, so be mindful of going too far. Back and forth will happen all the time. As the more we expand, the more enemies we'll find, and it is a very large area to cover. Embrace it and fight through it for victory. In terms of diplomacy, we are part of the Order Tide, be it the Empire, Bretonnia, the High Elves, the Dwarves, or even Cathay and Kislev. Embrace it, trade with them, and get outposts with them to achieve your goals. Early enemies will be actually Empire factions. The Vampire counts as well, and then some Beastmen to the north, some Greenskins, and Feasters. Then it depends on the endgame victory conditions that you may have, but you will always have to contend from threats from Norscan territories and from Chaos. You'll be the stalwart defender against them. Best outposts are most likely the ones that I'm going to show you. Be it the Dwarfs for some extra heavy infantry, some missile troops, the High Elves for flying units, and Bretonnia for more flying units. These are the choices that I would pick just for some interesting combinations. As for mechanics, prestige is the unique currency used to influence other empire factions, either to improve their relations or to decrease their relations. Imperial authority is something to keep an eye out for, as it will influence the other empire factions to love us or hate us, alongside with some poor buffs and some nice debuffs, which may even result in triggering an early civil war, unless we are prepared. Late game we will probably wish for it, as that counters all the negative buffs, and of course you may wish to conquer those places, but timing is important. Coming up next, we have the Elector Counts mechanic. Every state capital basically provides you with some buffs, with an item, and an Elector Count state troops, which are improved versions of your units. You may even wish to have army compositions based around these interesting buffs. What you do basically is, as you have the state capital, you can assign one of your lords to that to gain those buffs. The state troops themselves, they're an interesting type of unit. They take some turns to fill in, but they can be recruited instantly. Now this is a very good way to giving you some possible tactical recruitment when in a hurry. In terms of edicts, the Empire has pretty much the standard of standards. Control, corruption, enemy hero action success chance, and chance of intercepting armies are very good in specific situations. Income from all buildings is pretty straightforward. Recruitment cost is kind of negligible, but the important for the extra unit recruitment, so the local recruitment capacity +1, that is important. The most important one is probably this one, the growth +20 with an income from trade tariffs +5% faction wide. This is a good one to have, especially in your forts, otherwise the edicts there would just be a little bit useless. In terms of army stances, they're kind of the default as well. Basically you have some channeling for winds of magic, encamp and raid, which take up 50% movement range from you, and they allow you immunity to most attrition. Of course, encamp allows you replenishment and access to the global recruitment pool. You'll need the ambush many times during a campaign at a cost of 25% movement range, and of course the good old forced march stance. Altdorf itself has plenty of specific buildings, such as the port, such as the Castle Reichgard, the Altdorf Colleges of Magic, and the Imperial Palace, as well as some kilns. Now, in terms of the amount of buildings, it's maybe too many to build for just one province. Also consider the Imperial Academy, which is quite worthwhile, with a research rate, for instance, and a recruitment duration. Now, military is decent, even at tier 3. You have some great swords, some huntsmen, some mortars, and some handgunners, as well as lots of cavalry options. But it is the tier 4 units, the Emigraph Knights, and the Hellstorms and Great Cannons, that will form the brunt of your elite armies. There are 5 military buildings, with 2 being able to build in minor settlements, as they are tier 3, and of course you can build those in minor settlements. Wissenland will most likely become our artillery-producing province because of its unique building, the Known Gunnery School. As for infrastructure, a growth and replenishment building, an income building, a control building, and a growth, speed, and income building are all nice for some solid, profitable provinces. Research focuses on each aspect of the game, with many different paths to choose. Special attention to the diplomatic corps, which may result in different campaigns if you wish to try those, such as getting better diplomatic relations right at the start with Kislev, Southern Realms, the High Elves, the Dwarfs, and Bretonnia. This may lead to early outposts and, of course, a rather different campaign. There's a special note, or a bad note, into the Elector Counts ones, because by the time that we get these, most of the time it should be already easy to control, or this would already be worthless. So a kind of a negative note on that regard. Our Lord skills are divided into 4 main areas. Our Legendary or specific Lord buffs, our Yellow Line buffs for combat or magic, our Army or Red Line buffs, and our Campaign or Blue Line buffs. Starting with the Blue Line, they are always very specific to each faction. I take the special attention to finding if they have any upkeep reduction or any replenishment rate. Those two are always my priority personally. There are people who always prioritize a lightning strike. It is up to you. This has been reduced since Mortal Empire, since Warhammer 2, but it's still quite useful. It is up to you to use it. Now, in terms of army buffs, it will always ensure your troops fight better. I always recommend it. It's one of my priorities to find out the typical combinations. I'll show you some army compositions in a bit. But for the Empire, they're rather divided, you know, and they also imply that you will have to spend many points on the red line to fully buff all of your army. So different army compositions are required and some planning is required. Now, in terms of the heroes, so our heroes have important embedded abilities. So when they are with an army, accompanying an army, they have an ability such as training from Empire captains, such as replenishment rate from warrior priests. I do love this one. It's one of my top priorities, is to always have good replenishment. It helps ensuring that you maintain the pace within a campaign and to be very much well prepared for any attacks. We also have scouting for a bright wizard that impacts how many items you'll receive. This is very good in the early game. And we also have scavenge from the witch hunter. Now, in terms of the specific lords that you can recruit, our collectors are kind of like the support lord. You have the generals of the empire, basically a melee lord with some interesting abilities, and we have the huntsman general, which is basically an anti-large missile general, and he also has some specific abilities that I'll showcase in just a few moments. Whenever you can, when you're trying to select this, always check here because it will tell you the abilities. See? This was changed. Previously it didn't happen. So our collector actually has some auras, some ward save here, some bombardment, so that may be your cup of tea. Okay? So here we have all the red line skills, first line and second line of course, and the units that they affect. This is what I use to compile and to plan out my army compositions, as you'll see right now. So in terms of army compositions, I typically like to have a caster hero and a melee hero alongside my lord. This is for better variety and flexibility, but by all means you can choose whatever options you wish, you know, to have more heroes, to have none. I would disadvise having none from my experience, but it's up to you guys really. Now, Karl Franz, he buffs great swords and rake guards, so of course we can use those for specific compositions, for fun. Do notice the yellow number, which is the number of red line skills needed to fully buff those units with our lord. Now, apologies that this is in yellow, but if it was in red, you wouldn't be able to see it with the background. Yeah, sorry. Sorry if it is confusing. But yes, so if you fully want to buff all of these units, then you would need 14 skill points dedicated on the red line. That's what I mean. Of course, I have one with some handgunners, some cavalry, some outgunners here, some outriders, sorry, outgunners. And we have some with artillery instead of the handgunners, and the most basic, let's say, one that I would use. This does require 18, but it's kind of more standard that I would use for a campaign. Now, in terms of the Huntsman General, you can see that he also buffs great swords, spearmen and halberdiers, and has some more range for huntsmen and archers. So of course I tried to give him different compositions. One with some halberds, great swords, some huntsmen, some cavalry here, and a different one with some artillery. Notice how expensive the red line skills are. Remember that? This is always important. This is what I meant. For me, the The key number has been 15. 15 is decent, it's average. If it is lower than that, then we have a good deal. More than that, then it's kind of like a bad deal. Then finally, these are the more standard ones that I would use. So the first one being the very standard. Some handgunners, some artillery, some cavalry, some great swords at the front. Perfect. You will never fail. If you only build this, trust me, you won't fail. Then some theory crafting here. Just trying to use some of the early game units and see if they can perform against some factions in the end game. That's the idea. And of course, this goes more into the elite stack if you prefer, only spending 11 on the red line skills, but of course no missile troops other than the artillery. So those are kind of like the ones that I would use out. Of course, different combinations of the caster. I only use the flame because that's the fire mage, because that's the default one. So of course you can use different casters, different magic, but yeah, you can get an idea of how armies would go with the Empire. Somewhat expensive on the red line, but this is the sort of idea that I would use. As a final note, Karl Franz made me realize how interesting the whole faction is. Army composition relying on great cavalry and artillery supported by average infantry, but lacking single entities is still quite fun to use. Replenishment should be easy to come by, being one of my priorities when playing. Replay value is very high, given how much different campaigns can be, how much the different endgame scenarios would change everything, so I guarantee many hours with just even Karl Franz. Let me know if you liked the video, and thank you very much for your time. Feel free to comment below. I always answer whenever I can. Thank you, and have fun.